There was a question about how to build a piston engine using SketchUp and SketchyPhysics. This is one that I made. And the way it works is that we have these three blocks here. One of them is attached to this slider, this one, so it will slide back and forth, whereas one block here is attached to the motor. So the motor is actually driving the whole thing. Between the two of them you have a linker arm, and it's attached to both by means of these two hinges, so the hinges are passive. The motor provides all of the driving force for the piston engine. As it's going, you can see that I have to offset one of the blocks so it doesn't run into the other two. So in this way it can freely pass them by. So let's see how you make one of these. In SketchUp I'm going to make a rectangle. This rectangle is going to be 4 feet by 1 foot. I'm using the dimensions tool down here, so I can type in 4 feet, 1 foot in order to define the size. Next I'll use my push-pull tool, and I'm going to pull it up 6 inches. And that makes my block. But this block is actually not a SketchyPhysics block. It's really a collection of faces and edges. And so if we start the simulation, you see it doesn't move, you can't grab it or anything. So you need to select the whole thing, right click, and then make it into a group. Grouped objects are subject to physics. So next I want to make 2 more copies of this. I'll use my move tool, move it along the red axis here. I know it's 4 feet long, and so I'll move it a certain 4 feet and 8 inches, and I'm pushing the control key to make this copy. So I type in 4 foot 8 inches, and then since I want 2 of them, you can type in 2x and hit return, and now I have 2 copies plus the original, so 3 pieces total. Each of these is an independent object. They all fall. So the next thing I need to do is put a motor on one. So I'll set a motor in the center of edge with the axis going on the blue axis. I'll use my joint connector. Click on the motor, control click onto the block, and then run my simulation. You can see the block is rotating with the motor, and the other two are going to fall forever. They're not attached to anything. So why doesn't this fall? The reason is that the motor object is static under normal circumstances, and so it is not going to fall. It's not going to move. You really can't do anything with it. And since it's fixed in space, then the block that it's attached to will also be fixed in space. So let's say I make a joint here. I'll connect the joint to both of these, and now we're going to expect the two of them to be linked together. I run my simulation, and as you can see, this block will rotate freely, the other block will not move, because the hinge joint is itself also fixed in 3-dimensional space. It won't move anywhere. One way to join 2 objects so that they'll move with a joint is to edit the group. Let's say put this in here, and now this joint is part of a group. It moves with the entire group, which is nice. And I can use my joint connector, and now see, they move freely around, kind of the way I expect. The motor makes everything rotate, and the hinge allows the second block to move freely, except that, as you can see, the second block is able to pass completely through the first block as though it were not a solid object. And for the purposes of a lot of simulations, it doesn't really matter that it can do that. But for this simulation, I really want all my solids to act like solids. The reason this doesn't work is because this hinge is inside a group. What I really want is an independent hinge. And the way I make this is by making some other kind of SketchUp object. I'm going to make a circle here. I'll make it to a radius of 3 inches. That circle. And I'm going to put a hinge in the middle. And now I'm going to select the hinge and the circle, right click on it, and make it into a group. So now this is an independent group. It's not actually attached to anything else. And if I run the simulation, as you can see, the hinge falls independently. So now I use my joint connector. I'm going to join that hinge to both of these two blocks, run the simulation, and now, as you can see, it is spinning around because of the motor, just like I expect. See if I can catch it. There we go. And the connected block, as you can see, treats the other block, the rotating block, as though it were solid. It runs into it and will not move. Also, the whole thing kind of sags for gravity. We'll fix that part later. So now I'm going to make another hinge to join the second and third blocks to each other, just like I did this one. So again, I'll make a circle. It's simply made up of a surface and an edge, and so it's not subject to physics. Then I'll get a hinge. I'm going to put it in the center of that circle. That's arbitrary, by the way. You don't really have to put it in the center. It's the way I do it. Select all of those parts, make it into a group. I'm going to move the group over 4 inches. Oops. Now I'm going to join this hinge to this block. Well, I have to click it again with the joint connector because I didn't hit the joint. There we go. Join those three together. And now, if I run the simulation, it's going to act like I feel it should, except that it sags even more. Oh, I have an extra motor here for some reason. Okay, so I want this block then to be the piston. It goes back and forth, and I'll do that by connecting it to a track, a slider. The slider should constrain its movements in one dimension. So it doesn't really matter where I put it, but I'll set it here on the center line. It doesn't matter how big I make it either. And connect it to the third block. And so now we should be able to make this work. Let's see. No, it won't work. Why doesn't this move? And the reason is because, let's see, you use our UI tool. It has a minimum and maximum, but the minimum is 0. That is to say, it only will move in this direction, but it won't move in that direction, in the opposite direction. I need to set a minimum distance. So I'm going to set my minimum to be minus 100. And I'll set my maximum at plus 100. And we run it, and now, okay, yeah. Okay, now it almost moves the way I want. Is there something wrong with the slider? Maybe I didn't make the slider dimensions big enough. Let's give it 1,000. That should be more than enough. So, oh, okay. The reason why it's not working is because these two blocks are running into each other since they're all on the same line. I forgot to offset one of them. So I'm going to offset this block, and I think I'll offset the two hinges. I'm going to move them down. Since it's 6 inches tall, I'm going to move it down 7 inches. There. So they shouldn't run into each other, and let's try it now. There we go. So a couple of the tricks. One is properly making the hinges as separate entities, offsetting the solid blocks, and then also make sure the slider joint has a negative minimum and a positive maximum value